The Guardian of the Worlds presents The Diary of Sot, The Encounter with the Forest Dwellers.
Kadak, the day 9th of the month of Athirmenes of the year 42nd after Universal War. My dearest diary, I can barely put into words the terror I felt in those dreadful moments when I was surrounded by those fearsome creatures. The monstrous being in front of me stared with its horrifying black eyes, revealing a double row of sharp teeth, which I was certain it intended to use to tear me apart. Its companions circled around me, as if waiting for that beast to decide to attack so they could join in the feast. After what felt like an eternity, during which my legs trembled with fear, I noticed the creature suddenly lunging at me. Fortunately, at that critical moment, a precise strike hit the creature's neck, causing it to collapse lifelessly right on top of me. Both I and the remaining creatures turned our gazes towards the source of that miraculous blow. There, I saw some dark-skinned beings with muscular torsos, their body extending backwards into four strong legs. These legs, as I would later learn, allowed them to move swiftly through the vast plains and dense forests of this planet. They also carried bows crafted from a material unfamiliar to me. Almost immediately, the beasts that had surrounded me charged at my saviors. As the monstrous creatures raced towards them, I watched as my rescuers pulled a strange object from a bag they carried on their third arm. To my amazement, with a swift motion, the object transformed into what appeared to be an arrow. Wasting no time, they knocked these peculiar projectiles into their bows, drawing the string tight. Despite the approaching danger, they held their fire, seemingly waiting for the perfect moment to ensure their shots would not miss. Then, just as the terrifying creatures were mere yards away, my saviors released their unusual projectiles, each one finding its mark, and the beasts collapsed instantly, lifeless. After that brief yet intense encounter, I found myself staring at these beings, uncertain of their intentions. Had they saved me out of some sympathy? My doubts were quickly dispelled as 6 of them aimed their strange weapons at me. I have no doubt they would have shot me too, if it had not been for a 7th figure, whom I took to be the leader, judging by his age and bearing, who raised his hand towards the sky, holding them. Even as they continued to aim at me, this one approached, while I still lay on the ground beside the trunk of a sturdy tree. When he was only a few inches from me, he used a long wooden staff he carried to pull at the chain of my pendant, revealing the amulet of light. This caused the others to lower their weapons. "Who are you?" asked I, feeling much more at ease after this change in their demeanor, realizing that my life was not longer in immediate danger. The last thing I remember is the leader suddenly striking me on the head with his staff. Dazed, I remember waking up on my knees, leaning forwards, with my arms, numbed and bound, tied to a post behind me. Looking around, I found myself in a strange chamber. Its dark walls, if they could be called such, seemed to be made from the skins of the first monsters that had attacked me in the forest. Yet, when I looked up, I saw a wooden ceiling, unlike anything I had seen before. The wood was solid, without any cracks. I started to wonder if I was inside of one of those enormous trees that surrounded Arus's mansion. The idea seemed absurd given the dimensions of the room, but if not, then where was I? All these thoughts vanished when I heard what I thought was a door creaking open. From between the skins stepped one of these beings. "Who are you?" asked I. Just like before, he approached me without uttering a word, making me wonder whether they could even understand me or simply choose to ignore my questions. "Where are we?" inquired I again. No matter how much I insisted, the being remained silent. But I did not lose hope. I knew that sooner or later I would get the answers I so desperately wanted. Without opening his mouth, the creature moved behind me and tugged at the ropes binding me. Pulling the stake from the ground, it nudged my knee with one of his forelegs, indicating that he wanted me to stand up. Once I was on my feet, he moved in front of me and began to pull me out of that strange place. Just before leaving, I noticed that the skins were merely decorative, covering wooden walls rooted into the ground. Then the creature made a strange sound that I could barely identify, and a beam of light penetrated the room from between the furs. Upon stepping outside, I finally understood the truth. My idea had not been so far off as I had suspected. The room was indeed within a cluster of trees, which explained the spaciousness of the area where I had been held. Outside, we traveled through a vast expanse where, in the distance, I noticed a sort of wooden fence, which I quickly realized marked the territory of these beings. I figured that this community, though they did not seem to understand me, must have some form of communicating. I was eager to discover how they did it, imagining it must be something unique. This experience brought back memories of my adventure in the cave Rat had led us to on our first mission, and the hardships we had endured at the hands of those creatures. Who would have thought that this planet, which I believed to be devoid of intelligent life, was actually inhabited by such strange and diverse beings? After walking several yards through the trees, we arrived at the area where it seemed the entire community had gathered. It was a wide open space, without trees, something like what we would call a plaza in Valdez, though much more rustic and less refined. What caught my attention was that overhead, shielding us from the rain and the harsh light of our star, were the same skins I had seen before. There, a large number of these beings were assembled, with their forelegs and multiple arms, brownish skin, and elongated faces. They wore no clothing, and their large eyes fixated on me as soon as my captor announced my arrival with a series of braying sounds. At a glance, I could distinguish males from females only by the long manes these last ones had, which fell to their waists just where their forelegs began. As I approached the crowd, I noticed several of them stepping aside, creating a path. Through it, I saw the leader who had struck me earlier. To my surprise, he was reclining on a wooden throne covered in skins, holding the same distinctive staff in his three-fingered hand. Behind him, I noticed what I assumed was his entourage, for unlike the others, they also carried the staffs, which I quickly understood to be symbols of authority. Once presented before this figure, my captors drove the stake into the ground, immobilizing me, and then stepped back, disappearing into the crowd. Standing alone before the leader of this community, I felt the penetrating gaze of these beings upon me, making me even more nervous. Suddenly, the one I assumed was the chief of the strife struck the dusty ground with his long scepter. An uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. broken only by the sound of the drizzle falling that pattered around us, though the skin overhead protected us from the rain.